Hi, and welcome to Sacred Spaces. My name's Michaela Drieberg, and today we're in the Victorian Comprehensive Cancer Centre. It's a new centre that's been built in Parkville and really brings together not only patient care but also research and training. I've been joined by Kristen Beatty-Smith, who's here from DesignInc, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about what's been involved with a project like this. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Michaela.
So, where do you even begin with such a complex project, which is in a really key area just on the north of the Melbourne city, but has such an important purpose?
Where do you begin? I think it all begins with an idea. I think the client has to have a very clear brief, and I think for this project we were given a very, very comprehensive brief for the Comprehensive Cancer Centre. The ideas started to flow as soon as we received the information describing what was required. And I think the important thing here was that the vision was very clear. The three pillars of research, clinical care and patient care, but also of education, were clearly defined in the brief. And from there, we were able to start thinking about the planning, the architecture, and the way that we could bring patients and researchers together to create something quite unique.
And in such a beautiful environment. Now, you weren't the only architectural firm that was involved with this, and it was quite a few teams involved with the entire project.
Yeah, that's correct. I represent DesignInc, but also represent as JV Director a combination of Silver Thomas Hanley and DesignInc, and then we were partnered with McBride Charles Ryan, so the three companies together collaborated with the rest of the design team, which was quite extensive. From wayfinding consultants, landscape designers, a whole host of other specialists, and together we created what we see here today.
So before we go into the detail of this welcome hall that we're in right now, can you tell us a little bit more about the geographical area? So where is the VCCC located?
So it's on a key location, a key landmark location on the edge of the CBD. So we're at a key node of the Parkville precinct, which is recognised globally for its research and health outcomes. And I think logistically the location here is very important. The vistas and the views from the building and to the building are extensive. So we're bounded by Flemington Road, Elizabeth Street and Royal Parade, but also Grattan Street. So three key arterial routes in and out of the city. And I think the architecture and the urban response that the team produced had to respect this idea of, Melbourne was born on some great urban architecture and some great landmark buildings. And I think the VCCC is going to be one of those buildings that's no different, although it is a hospital and a really an unusual landmark building for a very unusual site.
It certainly is. It's one of those buildings that really stands out on that roundabout on the north of the CBD that visitors to the area may not even realise that it's for patient care. It's essentially a hospital. And was that something that you really wanted to make sure was in the end product?
Certainly. We fundamentally wanted to create a building that was not a hospital, not recognised as a hospital or a research institute, but recognised as somewhere important from an urban and from a public sense. I think the importance of what the Peter McCallum and the partners will create in here, the search for the cure for cancer, really needs to be emphasised in the architecture as well. So the importance of the work that they're doing here and the way that they do work has been demonstrated in the way that the architecture and the envelope and the interior of the building have been designed.
So let's talk about the interior of the building and this welcome hall that we're in, which is so bright and open and welcoming. What are some of the key features that you're especially proud of?
I think that coming in from the external architecture, which creates a starting point for the internal architecture, we were looking for the idea that hope can be translated into architecture and built form. We were looking for the idea that collaboration between the building partners can also be demonstrated in the way that architecture is designed and developed on the large scale as well as on the small scale. So externally you can see a lot of branching elements that wrap around the building in a building spiral, which celebrate the idea of networks both within the building and the building partners, but also within the Parkville precinct. That network idea has been extended into the atrium and the welcome hall. So what you see here is a large central space, the idea being that within a dense hospital environment and a dense research institute with lots of rooms and planning, we create a central space that is more welcoming for patients and staff. And the idea of collaboration is portrayed by the way that we've articulated softly each of the floors, which are all quite different in terms of their shape. But also when you look at the lift wall, the idea of this collaboration is celebrated by the balustrade edges coming together, crossing over, and showing this idea of networks that can mix and connect.
So one thing that stands out is the use of timber within the welcome hall. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, we use timber extensively through all of the public spaces. I think the idea that timber can actually add some depth to what is quite a neutral space. We wanted to use the idea of timber as well because we've used the analogy of Victorian timbers. The snow gum has been used for the idea of branching. It's also been used for the colour palette throughout the building as inspiration. So the use of timber for us within this building predominantly demarcates public areas, key areas where we want people to gather. So we've used timber on the main public lift. It's used also on the wellness centre extensively, and then on level 7 where we've got the gathering and mixing floor outside of the lecture theatre and so on. We then also use timber sparingly, but quite frequently through the building on key public areas such as waiting rooms, wayfinding areas, turning points through the space.
Something else that you see as soon as you walk into the entrance is the reception desk, which is quite vast and again reflects the curves that are visible throughout the building.
Wherever you enter, your eye is drawn to the welcome desk. The welcome desk being the curved form and the introduction to the building that most first-time patients and visitors will experience. We wanted that first experience to represent the experience that they'll have throughout the building, which is of a space that is, again, inspiring, hopeful. There's some soft and warmth, and the idea that the experience for the patient will be enhanced and will be different in this building.
One thing that's different is the balconies behind us, which you can't go past. You see them as soon as you walk in, and again, the curves have been brought in. Was that something that was intentionally done to reflect throughout the building as well?
Certainly was. When we first looked at the brief and the planning of the building's actually it's a triangular site, but it's actually the size of a city block. So a triangular site that's half a city block is quite a deep footprint to actually deal with. One of the key design ideas throughout this process was to integrate daylighting, natural light, and views through and beyond to landscape and the city wherever we could. So our sort of idea and the device that we created was a large central atrium. That atrium could have been quite linear or rectilinear in its form, but we wanted to again emphasise this idea of the central space being different to the rest of the planning of the building, so the soft forms naturally helped us differentiate each level, bounce light through the space, but also emphasise the experience as you enter the building, but also as you leave the lifts on every floor, and that atrium is then used as a central wayfinding device so that again patients and staff can always orientate themselves around the centre of the building.
The atrium is absolutely stunning, and to me clearly demonstrates the benefit of bringing so many different teams together, and this is what you end up with.
Thank you. It's a really important device and an important design decision to create this atrium. What we did do what was talked about throughout the process was that, the concern, would there be enough daylight penetrating through the building from level 13 down to the basement? And you can see today that as the weather changes, the daylight is fantastic, but also the amount of daylight does change through the day. With a large glazed roof, and some shading devices at the top level, it does allow deep daylight penetration, but also protects against the late afternoon sun. So we're very happy with the outcome. There was a lot of engineering modelling that had to happen to test the daylight and prove that it would work, as well as all of the technical safety aspects of smoke control and the use of that space from a public point of view, because it is, in essence, a fully open space from ground floor up to level 7.
Well, you've blown me away just here in this welcome hall, but I'd love to see more of your work. So do you mind showing me around?
Let's go.
Well, Kristen, we're in a typical lab space now. I've got to admit, I've never seen lime green walls and hot pink flamingos in here before, but you know, it all adds to the elements. But what do people do in this space?
We're in a space for 60 researchers. These researchers come from Peter Mac, Royal Melbourne Hospital and the University of Melbourne. And what they're doing in here varies. It varies between floors and between research clusters. This is a cluster for 60. They combine quite traditional scientific uses of wet labs, dry labs, and actual support space for write-ups and PhD use. But what happens in here, look, it just varies. There's lots of specialties that are required to test and research and look into, again, finding the cure for cancer.
And so what floor are we actually on?
We're on level 12, which is the highest occupied floor of the building at this moment in time. What we've developed and our approach has been between levels 8 to 12 are the research floors, and they are predominantly laboratory, but also again support space, some external terraces for staff amenity, and also breakout spaces.
Now, speaking of staff amenity, I don't know anyone else that would have a view like this working in a lab space. It's unbelievable, and I've never seen this side of Melbourne before. You know, to see the northern side of the CBD and just looking at, especially the Elizabeth Street that goes all the way to Flinders Street Station. It's an unbelievable view, which again I would imagine would just add to people's experience being within the building.
Yeah, certainly. We wanted to emphasise the views out of the building for all of the staff and patients on the lower clinical levels, but also the views of the building are really important. What we've designed here, and why you can see the view out there, is as much glazing as we could physically install in this building, whilst maintaining a high environmental credential for the building. So there is a combination of large performance glass area, but also a series of sunshades that respond to the orientation. And as you see around the building, the idea of the spiral, this idea of collaboration and networks wrapping around the building, spiralling from the Elizabeth Street starting point at ground level up to the very top of the building. The sunshades follow that spiral, and they help to emphasise that this isn't just an ordinary place. This is more than just an ordinary building, and certainly for a hospital, it is quite unique.
Because it not only gives you a fantastic view, but it contributes to it as well. So we're in a different environment now, Kristen. Where are we?
We're on level 7. Level 7's the mixing floor, which is the sandwich in between the clinical floors below and the research floors up above. I think the important thing about this floor is it is where clinicians and researchers do mix and collaborate, but also the public have free access to this floor. So we've co-located a lot of different functions up here to encourage that collaboration. They start off where we are now. We're standing on the level 7 bridge, which is a connection over to the medical offices behind us, where most of the clinical senior staff are based. In an open plan environment, which is quite unusual within the hospital realm. We then also, though, use this space, the bridge, for gatherings. So this is a function space designed for about 200 people. And as a function space, it's connected to the space that we've got in front of us, which is the lecture theatre. That lecture theatre doubles up as both for public lectures but also training throughout the facility. And it doubles up also though as the space where within the smaller lecture theatres that are in there, patient cases are assessed, and a lot of the technology is very, very high tech, which connects all of the scanning and imaging facilities through the space or through the centre, as well as all of the operating theatres. A lot of live streaming can be brought in for training purposes, and it's something that's really essential to the development of research and clinical treatment within the building.
So you mentioned that we're in a bridge, essentially, but the bridge also is a physical bridge that goes across Grattan Street through to the Royal Melbourne Hospital. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the centre connects to the Royal Melbourne Hospital on level 7 and on level 6 by a double bridge. That links over to further operating theatres, intensive care and some other inpatient wards. Also there's a second bridge on level 2. That's a heavily used bridge which connects a lot of the day patients and clinics from the centre here over to Royal Melbourne Hospital, and we see that to be a very highly used bridge link. But both of the bridge links are really part of this idea of the connection and the spiralling, and it's just again another great metaphor across Grattan Street of the connections between the VCCC and the Parkville precinct.
Something else that this public access area gives people the opportunity to go to is a cafe and even a garden. So how did they come to be?
Level 7, the Level 7 cafe is really the first cafe to be developed and will be open when the building opens mid-year. That connects and takes patients and staff through the cafe onto a very generous, I think one of the largest rooftop gardens in Melbourne. It's a very generous space that's used for reflection, circulation, respite, and just a great place to be when you're spending a lot of time in hospital, whether you're a patient or a worker. I think the benefits of the connection to nature and landscape can't be emphasised enough. And in this heavily urbanised environment that we find ourselves in, I think those outdoor connections to nature and landscape are really crucial for the success of this centre.
So Christian, we're in one of the clinical areas now, and is this quite typical of some of the wards throughout the centre?
There's a whole range of clinical spaces on multiple floors. What we've tried to create though on each floor is a common theme of daylight penetration, both from the external windows but with internal windows through all of the spaces. So this is a chemotherapy area of the building where patients are in here frequently and for quite a few hours. So I think the importance of connection with daylight is really, really crucial. We've used, wherever we can, a very soft colour palette which breaks up the various areas. What we have in here is groups of 6 bays for chemotherapy chairs, but also some independent rooms as well. I think the common theme that we've got throughout all of the spaces though is what we see behind us, which is the nurse stations. And they're used as a key wayfinding device, but also an observation device. So they've been strategically located at the node points and key points so that supervision is guaranteed throughout all of the spaces.
What other elements did you need to incorporate in, it's not only about design work in a centre like this, but it's very much about the patient care. So I imagine that was quite complex.
Very complex, and I think the team really started off the design process by thinking about how physically and technically we can deliver the great space and the great place for patient care. Technically there's a lot of things to consider that you don't see as you walk through this great centre, but I think the incorporation of those is really a testament to the strong teamwork that we had throughout the project.
And something else you mentioned to me was a strong emphasis on engagement with the users of this centre as well, which was done throughout really 6 years of the project.
Yeah, during probably an intensive 18-month period, we had over 500 user group workshops. Those workshops considered everything from the scale of the footprint of the building down to every doorstop and element in this building. So in the detail workshopping process, we got to talk to all of the users, many of the stakeholders, clinicians, researchers, as well as patients, youth patients, but also volunteers and all of those associated groups that have a real say in how this place could become a better place for patient care.
And we're actually in one of the areas now where chemotherapy will be administered, and I can see what you mean about the natural light that comes in and essentially what is a really pretty outlook to be able to stare off into the distance when you're not going through a very nice time.
Certainly. We're on level 3 and we're looking out at the top of the tree canopy. On every floor you do get that outlook. We have glazing which is from ceiling down to a very low sill height. So you either get tree canopy views, distant views of the city, or sky views. And I think the importance of that daylight penetration just can't be overestimated.
Yeah, there's countless research that talks about the amenity that you are in and having access to greenery in particular, just how it can be so much beneficial for people's mental well-being.
Yeah. It works, it's true, and I think in an urban environment, what you can do is create outlook and views. But also then, throughout the building, we do have some small, but several of them, landscape terraces that I think we use very well to get the patients and the staff outside whenever they can.
So Kristen, we're outside now and we're on the first floor in one of those gorgeous gardens that you mentioned, and behind us is the Wellbeing Centre, which is unusual to have in a centre like this. So how did that come to be?
We're sitting in the garden sort of inspired by the rainforest, and behind there is the Wellness Centre, which is really a space that anyone can come into and find out about cancer. It's a space that's been designed not to look like anything else within the centre, but to be a place where it's calm. You can come in for a cup of coffee, rest, and also there'll be facilities in there for classes such as yoga and other services that will be provided in the centre.
So, I mean, there's so many different areas within this whole building. 6 years in the making, almost there, due to open in mid-year in 2016. If you could choose a sacred space within this whole centre, where would it be?
There's lots of lovely spaces throughout the building, but I think the most inspirational for me, and I hope for many people as they enter the building, is when you walk in the welcome hall, you walk towards the atrium, towards the daylight, and you look up and you see that great atrium space. There's lots of variety in there, and it really demonstrates the whole idea of hope and the whole idea of connection and collaboration within the Parkville precinct, and particularly in the VCCC.
It's an amazing centre. I can only imagine what it will be like to be in here, but you've given such a beautiful space for people to be in, and something you should be really proud of.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for showing us around today, Kristen, and we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully sometime in the future. My name's Michaela Drieberg. You've been watching Sacred Spaces, and we'll see you next time.